Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world-top stories. Let's view the video. The town that vanished overnight. Whispers in the wind. The storm that wasn't on the map. The sky above the quiet town of Elmswood looked ordinary that evening. Soft streaks of pink and orange painted the horizon. But for those who had lived there long enough, something felt off. The birds had stopped chirping. The air, heavy and still, carried a scent of iron and damp soil. At precisely 7:03 p.m., a strange wind blew through the town, cold, whispering, unnatural. No one could say where it came from, but it made curtains flutter and old doors creak open without touch. And then, without warning, it stopped. Dead silence followed. Flickering lights and fading signals. Across the town, lights began to flicker. Radios crackled, phones lost signal, and the power grid failed in a sequence that seemed timed, not chaotic, but deliberate. At the diner on Main Street, a waitress named Ellie watched the neon sign sputter before it died entirely. Across the booth, her customer, an old man with eyes that never blinked, whispered, "It's happening again." But when she asked him to explain, he was gone, just gone. No footsteps, no door creak, just a cup of coffee slowly cooling. The man in the hat. At the edge of town, 12-year-old Jacob spotted a man in a wide-brimmed hat standing motionless in the cornfield. He told his parents, but when they looked, the field was empty. Jacob swore. He saw the man raise his hand and point at him just before vanishing into thin air. That night, Jacob drew the man in his sketchbook, a figure with no face, just shadows where features should be. The drawing, later found at the edge of the woods, was soaked in something that looked like ink, but wasn't. A knock that never came from the door. On the outskirts, an elderly couple, Henry and Margot, sat watching an old Western movie when they heard a knock at the window. Not the door, the window. But they lived on the second floor. Henry, skeptical, pulled back the curtain and saw nothing but the empty front yard. Yet the knock came again, harder, louder. This time, Margot checked. And for a moment, she saw her sister outside, who had died 15 years ago. She was smiling, Margot later wrote in her diary, but her eyes were bleeding. The bell tower that rang itself. The town's old church hadn't been used in decades, yet at 9 p.m. that night, its bell tolled 5 times. No one saw anyone inside. The church was supposed to be locked. But the sound echoed through the streets, deep and somber like a warning. Teenagers who had gathered at the skate park nearby said they saw shadows pour from the church door. Not people, one of them recalled years later. Shapes, like something pretending to be people. Disappearing roads and shifting trees by. Midnight, people who tried to leave couldn't. The roads looped, the GPS spun in circles. Trees shifted positions when no one was looking. A trucker passing through reported the same gas station 3 times in a row. Each time, it looked more broken down than before. He turned back and found the road had vanished completely behind him, replaced by thick, silent forest. The trucker left his rig and ran. He was never seen again. Only the truck remained, its tires melted to the asphalt. The girl who knew too much. At 2:13 a.m., A young girl named Sarah was found crying at the town square fountain, whispering to herself. No one knew where she came from. She didn't live in Elmswood. She said her family melted. When asked what that meant, she only repeated one thing. They opened the wrong door. The wind told them to. She handed the sheriff a piece of paper with one word scribbled over and over: remember. Then she vanished, leaving behind only a small blue ribbon and a scent of burning wood. Time slipped like sand by 3 a.m. Time seemed to stretch and bend. Clocks ran backward. A bakery worker watched the sun rise, then set again within 5 minutes. People reported déjà vu loops, reliving the same conversation 3 or 4 times, each with slight differences. A local mechanic, now panicked, ran into the street screaming, "We're stuck! The town's eating itself!" His skin was pale and cold as if frostbitten. He collapsed moments later, but his body was never found when emergency responders arrived. The final broadcast. At 3:33 a.m., the local radio station, long since off air, transmitted a single low hum. Then a voice. It wasn't anyone locals recognized. "They are here," it said, "and you are not." The message played 3 times before cutting to static. Those who heard it said they felt nauseous afterward, like their insides had been twisted. One man reported that his reflection no longer moved in sync with him. The last light in Elmswood. At 4:06 a.m., the last light in Elmswood went out, a single street lamp at the corner of Ash and Willow. A local mailman named Robert was the only one who saw it. It flickered like it was trying to stay alive. He wrote in his journal. Then it blinked once and the town exhaled. Everything just went still. No sound, no air, just quiet. Too quiet. And when the sun finally rose, there was no one left. No signs of struggle. Just empty homes, warm coffee, half-read books, and footprints that led nowhere. Empty streets, silent clocks, continuing the eerie and immersive story of the town that vanished overnight. A town left in mid-sentence. The sun rose over Elmswood, but it found no one waiting to greet it. Houses stood perfectly intact, beds made, dishes drying on racks, radios still playing soft static. It was as if the town had taken a collective breath and then disappeared. A half-sipped glass of lemonade sat on a porch table. A lawnmower was still running, circling slowly until it ran out of fuel. Everything was frozen, mid-action, but there were no people, not a single one. The school bell that rang to no one. At 8 a.m. sharp, the bell at Elmswood Elementary rang. The building should have been alive with laughter, footsteps, and hurried chatter. Instead, empty halls echoed with the haunting clang of the bell, as if calling ghosts to class. Desks were still arranged neatly, books open to half-read pages, pencil tips mid-scratch. A forgotten sandwich sat in a lunchbox. In one classroom, the whiteboard read, "Today's lesson, Who We Are." The marker had bled down the board like it had been crying ink. Mail that never got delivered. The mailboxes were all full. Letters from loved ones, bills, magazines, each one a time capsule of a moment no one lived to see. A package sat at the foot of one house, wrapped tightly and addressed to a Margaret Ellis. Inside, a music box playing a lullaby no one recognized. The melody didn't stop. No matter how many times it was closed, it kept playing. The post office door was ajar. and the mail cart stood parked by the counter, key still in the ignition. The wall clock ticked, but its hands never moved. Footsteps that weren't yours. As search teams finally arrived, confused and unnerved, they noticed something deeply wrong. Footsteps echoed around them, but never matched their movements. Shadows flitted across alleyways, but no one was there. When they split up to cover more ground, several reported seeing people in the windows, only for those figures to vanish the second they were approached. One investigator described seeing a child's silhouette waving from behind a curtain, but when he entered, the room was colder than ice, and every mirror in the house had shattered inward. The garden with no birds. The town park, usually blooming and bright, was unnaturally still. Flowers drooped as if mourning. The pond was motionless, reflecting the sky like a polished mirror, but nothing disturbed its surface. No birds, no squirrels, not even the buzz of insects. A bicycle lay abandoned on the path, its wheels still spinning slowly. A nearby bench had a child's backpack on it, with a juice box still cold inside. Trees swayed gently, though there was no wind. And beneath the soil, something moved, just enough to crack the surface. The Clockmaker's Journal. In a tiny brick shop on Elm Street known as Tick and Tock sat dozens of clocks, grandfather, cuckoo, pocket. All of them had stopped at exactly 4:06 a.m. On the counter was the journal of Isaac Grimley, the town's eccentric clockmaker. His final entry read, "I've heard them. In the ticking. In the spaces between time. They told me the clocks don't measure hours anymore. They measure absence." The ink was smudged, as though written in haste or fear. Every clock, no matter the type or age, was frozen mid-tick. The room smelled of ozone and dust. The phone that kept ringing. Inside the Elmswood Police Department, a single desk phone kept ringing. Over and over. But when picked up, the line was silent except for a faint breathing sound. When officers traced the call, they found it was coming from inside the department's evidence locker. There, wrapped in an old sweater, was a disconnected rotary phone. Its receiver was warm to the touch. A sticky note on the shelf simply read, "Don't answer after 3 rings." No one could explain how the phone had a dial tone or how it kept calling every 3 hours. Graffiti that grew. Underneath the Main Street Bridge, investigators found strange markings, symbols that weren't there the day before. At first they looked like crude graffiti, but upon closer inspection, they were etched deep into the stone. Every hour more symbols appeared, twisting and curling like vines. One officer who tried to photograph them found his camera memory wiped clean. The only photo that remained was of himself, standing in front of the markings with a blurred figure beside him. A figure no one remembered being there. The sound only some could hear. Not everyone heard it, but those who did described it the same way. A low, humming song that played just beyond perception. Some said it sounded like a lullaby. Others, a funeral hymn. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Dogs brought into the town refused to move past the city limits, barking wildly at thin air. A technician monitoring sound frequencies picked up a signal he couldn't explain. Something below human hearing, pulsing steadily like a heartbeat. It matched the rhythm of the town's vanished church bell. The map that erased itself. perhaps most chilling was what happened next. Days after the disappearance, cartographers reported something strange. Elmswood had vanished from digital maps. GPS systems rerouted around the area as if it didn't exist. Printed maps blurred where the town used to be. Satellite images showed only dense forest. When officials tried to re-add Elmswood to records, their systems crashed or simply refused to save the information. One technician received an error message that read, "This location does not belong to you anymore. The last witness speaks." Found on the highway's edge. 2 days after Elmswood vanished, a trucker driving down Route 19 spotted a lone figure walking barefoot along the shoulder of the road. Drenched in sweat, wrapped in a hospital gown, and covered in ash, the man staggered into the path of the truck, forcing the driver to slam the brakes. He didn't scream or flinch, he just stood there staring. When medics arrived, the man said just one sentence. "I told them not to open the cellar," a name that shouldn't exist. At first, authorities had no idea who he was. He carried no ID, no tags, no wallet, not even shoes. But when he was finally calmed and questioned, he gave his name, Caleb Harlow. That name triggered a wave of confusion. According to town records, Caleb Harlow had died 56 years earlier, in a house fire on the southern edge of Elmswood. His death certificate had been signed, archived, and forgotten. And yet, here he was, alive, aging, breathing, with eyes that looked far older than his body. He remembered everything. Caleb didn't just remember the night Elmswood disappeared. He remembered every night before it, every whisper, every strange occurrence, every warning that the town ignored. He spoke of the wind that spoke in riddles, of the old well that never dried up, and of the clock tower that sometimes ran backward at night. He said Elmswood was never just a town. It was a lid, a cover, a seal over something ancient and buried. It wasn't built to thrive, he muttered. It was built to contain. The cellar beneath the church. According to Caleb, the old church on Pine Hill held more than pews and sermons. Deep beneath its foundation was a sealed cellar, built centuries ago and hidden from town maps. He claimed that long ago, the town's founders made a pact, one of silence and sacrifice. Something had been bound there, something not meant to be named. For generations, the cellar was never touched. The church was boarded up, left to rot. But then someone broke the chain. Someone opened it. The man who dug too deep. Caleb told them about Jonas Rigby, the town's unofficial historian and amateur archaeologist. Obsessed with Elmswood's strange history, Jonas believed the town was hiding ancient knowledge. 1 week before the vanishing, Jonas disappeared. Most assumed he skipped town. Caleb insisted otherwise. He claimed Jonas broke into the church, pried open the stone hatch beneath the altar, and went down into the cellar. Alone. That was the moment it began. He fed it, Caleb whispered. Fed it memory. And that's how it wakes. Memories gone missing. Investigators soon discovered something else disturbing. Everyone who once lived in Elmswood had been erased from nearby towns' memories. No one remembered visiting. No one recalled relatives living there. Old letters faded. Photographs turned blank. It was as if the town had never existed. But Caleb still remembered. Because Caleb had never truly left. I was always between, he said. Not alive, not dead. I saw them taken, not pulled, not dragged, rewritten. Drawings that told the future. Inside Caleb's hospital room, he began drawing, page after page, frantic, feverish. The images were haunting, faceless people standing in doorways, houses floating in the sky, trees that bled black sap, clocks melting over gravestones. He never stopped, each drawing more detailed than the last. One nurse flipped through them and found something chilling, an image of her own home, depicted perfectly, even down to the broken porch light. In the background, a shadow was watching through the window. She quit the next day. Voices from the walls. Caleb began hearing them again. Or perhaps he never stopped. He told the staff the walls whispered at night, calling him back. "They want me to finish it," he'd say. "They want to complete the loop." At 3:33 a.m. each morning, alarms in the hospital wing would short out. Electrical surges, flickering lights. In one instance, an entire wing lost power and found every TV playing, a silent broadcast of static and shadows. Caleb would just smile. "They found a new exit," he said. The interview that vanished. A government team arranged to interview Caleb, an official inquiry. They brought cameras, voice recorders, and documents. The entire session lasted 2 hours. But when they returned to review the footage, the files were gone. Every recording wiped, every backup corrupted. But one file remained, a 5-second audio clip of Caleb's voice. All it said was, "You think this is the end? Elmswood was only the first door." Gone again. 3 days later, Caleb Harlow disappeared from his hospital bed. No broken windows, no forced doors, just an empty bed, sheets still warm. Security footage showed static during the exact moment he vanished. The last thing visible on the tape was Caleb sitting up, looking directly at the camera, and smiling. Under his pillow, they found one final drawing. It showed the hospital wing engulfed in shadow, with every window covered in handprints. Below, it was written a single line in jagged black ink. "Some places don't forget you. Some places come looking." Buried secrets beneath the town. The dig that wasn't approved. Before Elmswood vanished, there was a quiet excavation happening behind the town's old library, a building so ancient it was more folklore than function. Officially, the dig was never sanctioned. No permits, no paper trail. Just a small crew of 5 men who arrived one night with blacked-out vans and began tearing up the earth behind the library's crumbling stone walls. They worked only after sundown. No one ever saw them leave or arrive. They left no tire tracks. Only mud, dust, and silence. Jonas Rigby's obsession. At the heart of the secret excavation was Jonas Rigby, the local historian turned recluse. Known for his obsession with the town's earliest settlers, Jonas believed Elmswood was built on something ancient, not a foundation, but a threshold. "They didn't settle here by chance," he once wrote in a letter never sent. "They settled here to keep something in." He believed the town's original blueprints, kept hidden in the library's locked archives, mapped a perfectly symmetrical grid, a grid that mirrored a long-forgotten symbol, the sigil of binding. The library that wasn't empty. The library had been abandoned for over 20 years, or so everyone thought. But when a search team broke down its front doors after the town disappeared, they found signs of recent activity. Candles burned low, notes scattered across desks, and strange etchings carved into the floorboards. One officer claimed he heard whispering between the shelves, though no one else was present. The books, once coated in decades of dust, looked freshly touched. On the wall, scrawled in charcoal, were the words, "He went too deep." The tunnel. Beneath shelf 17. It was behind a sliding bookshelf marked Local Legends that the entrance was discovered. A hole had been dug straight into the earth, supported by rotting wooden beams and lined with old lanterns. The tunnel twisted and descended for nearly 40 feet before reaching a cavern. Inside, stone walls lined with carvings, language unrecognized, symbols that pulsed faintly under flashlight beams. In the center of the chamber stood a sealed hatch, metal, rusted, bolted from the outside, scratched into its surface. "Do not open. It listens." The Founder's Pact. Among Jonas Rigby's belongings was a weathered manuscript titled The Founder's Pact. Dated 1796, it documented the original town settlers agreeing to bind and bury something they referred to only as the Hollow Guest. Descriptions were vague, but the tone was panicked. "It feeds on what we forget," one line read. "It grows where memory fails." The founders, it seemed, used the town itself as a prison, laying homes, roads, and churches in calculated patterns designed to suppress the entity below. Every structure served a purpose. Elmswood was not a town, it was a lock. The ritual. Gone wrong. Caleb Harlow, before his second disappearance, mentioned the breaking of the wheel. Investigators now believe Jonas, in his desperation for truth, performed a ritual to undo the founder's design. Pieces of the ceremony were pieced together from notes left behind, candles of grave wax, a compass carved from bone, the recitation of a phrase written backwards in a forgotten dialect. But something went wrong. Or maybe it went exactly as it was supposed to. Witnesses in neighboring towns reported a flash of red light in the sky the night before Elmswood disappeared, followed by silence that lasted 4 full minutes. The garden that shouldn't be there. Behind. The library, where the dig had occurred, was a new patch of ground, soft, overgrown, and sprouting flowers no botanist could identify. The plants pulsed faintly at night, releasing a scent that made animals flee. No one dared to step into it for long. A drone sent over the garden crashed within seconds, its final image capturing a glimpse of something moving beneath the soil. Something large and breathing. The stone that bleeds. In the center of the underground chamber, just before the sealed hatch, stood a stone pedestal. On it was an object covered in cloth. When removed, it revealed a stone sphere, cracked down, the middle with dark liquid slowly seeping from within. The fluid defied all testing, neither blood, oil, nor ink. When exposed to light, it curled upward like smoke, spelling out phrases in languages no one could read. The sphere, when touched, made people forget things, names, dates, even the reason they were there. The Journal of Silence. The final artifact recovered from the chamber was a leather-bound book with no title and no visible ink. Every page appeared blank, until viewed through glass smeared with ash. Then, and only then, the words became visible. A narrative not written in past or present, but future tense. It described the town vanishing, the roads twisting, the clocks stopping. It ended with a line written over and over. This is not the first. This is not the last. The chamber wasn't empty anymore. On the last day of the investigation, one team returned to the underground chamber to catalog the findings. But when they arrived, the stone hatch was open, the seal broken. There were no footprints, no tools, no sign of force, just an empty pit that led deeper than the eye could follow. A rope was lowered. No tension was ever felt. When it was pulled back up, it came out soaked and shredded. On the wall beside the hatch, written in wet black strokes, was one final message. It remembers now. The return, but nothing remains. A reappearance without warning. It happened at exactly 2:13 a.m. Without warning, without fanfare, Elmswood reappeared on the map. One moment, satellite images showed dense, featureless forest. The next, perfectly gridded streets, rooftops, and buildings were back where they had once stood. The town was just there, as if it had never left. Roads that had been paved over, cracked open, exposing the original blacktop beneath. Trees that had grown over the former town limits split apart at the roots, making space for streets that hadn't existed in over a month. But something was wrong. The first responders who stepped into Elmswood found everything restored, buildings, signs, even the welcome billboard on the outskirts. But the town was hollow, empty, not just of people, but of life. No birds chirped, no wind stirred. The air smelled like dust and ash, yet there was no fire damage. Radios in homes played the same song on a loop, a haunting waltz no one could name. A few brave men walked into houses and found tables set for dinner, TVs still playing, showers still running, all signs of life. But no one had returned. Photos with no faces. Investigators began collecting personal belongings from the homes, searching for clues. Photo albums were found, dozens of them. But in every single one, the people's faces were gone. Blurred or scratched out, replaced with blank ovals. In some cases, the entire figure had faded, leaving only shadows behind. Phones stored in drawers had thousands of photos, all blank. Only the backgrounds remained. Even surveillance cameras, streetlight footage, and ATM captures were empty. As if the town had lived, but the people had never truly existed. Sound in the static, a radio engineer set up equipment on the town's tallest point, Elmswood's old clock tower. He scanned frequencies, searching for anything, any sign of transmission. At first, there was only static. Then came the whispers, faint, fragmented, but unmistakably voices. Not one, but many, dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once, crying, calling, repeating names. One voice was clearer than the rest. It said, "We're still here, but it's wearing us now." The man who returned wrong. 3 days after the town's return, a man emerged from the woods at the edge of Elmswood, naked, disoriented, and speaking in a language no one could place. When brought in for medical evaluation, he began to scream whenever shown a reflection. Mirrors shattered in his presence. Cameras refused to focus on his face. His fingerprints matched no known database. But when a nurse showed him an old yearbook photo from Elmswood High, he pointed at a name. "That's me." The name was Benjamin Cross, reported missing the day Elmswood vanished. But Benjamin Cross had died. There was one problem. Benjamin Cross had died in a car accident 5 years prior. His grave still stood in the Elmswood Cemetery. But now, here he was, alive, breathing, and utterly wrong. His bones were misaligned, his teeth too uniform, as if molded. And beneath, his skin, doctors noted tiny patterns like writing. Not tattoos, not scars, just symbols. When shown a mirror again, he whispered, "That's not my face." Then he laughed, a laugh that didn't match his voice, a laugh that echoed twice. The graveyard was breathing. The cemetery at the edge of town, long untouched by even nature, had changed. Headstones had shifted, some buried deeper, others cracked open. Beneath the soil, the ground pulsed. Not metaphorically. Literally. As if something beneath was breathing. One investigator placed his hand on a sunken grave and described it as feeling like touching a rib cage. At the center of the cemetery, a new gravestone had appeared. No name, no date. Just a single inscription. You brought it back. The final tape. Inside the reappeared police station, in the evidence locker, a single VHS tape was found. It was labeled "Do Not Watch, 4:06 a.m." Against protocol, someone watched it. The footage showed the town square, quiet at night. Nothing moved. Then, exactly at 4:06 a.m., the street lamps flickered. Figures began to appear, tall, thin, impossibly long-limbed shadows, slipping from behind buildings, crawling from beneath cars. They didn't walk. They twitched. They gathered silently around the old fountain and began to look up at the camera. And then one of them smiled. Reality shifting. Strange events began happening to those who visited the town. They forgot things, names, faces. Even their own reflections began to change. One man reported walking down a street in Elmswood and arriving at his childhood home, one that had burned down years ago. Another swore he saw his wife inside one of the houses, baking, smiling. But his wife had never been to Elmswood. The town wasn't just back, it was leaking into reality, infecting it. A researcher who stayed overnight wrote only one sentence, before vanishing. The town dreams now, and we are its dream. The evacuation order. The government issued an emergency containment protocol. No one was allowed within 5 miles of Elmswood. A perimeter was set. But cameras posted around the borders began to malfunction. Soldiers stationed nearby reported hearing music at night, a lullaby from nowhere. Some even saw lights in the day, distance. Others began to sleepwalk, always toward the town. Eventually, the perimeter was abandoned, the risk too great. A wall was built. Elmswood was sealed once again, but not forgotten. The final message. Months later, an email was sent. To every major news outlet, the sender's address was untraceable. The message contained a single image, Elmswood, perfectly intact, as if lit by the glow of a full moon. And beneath it, text. You conceal a town, but not a memory, and it remembers all of us. Then, the email deleted itself, and somewhere in the distance, a clock ticks, 6 a.m. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.